Every person on the planet is one decision from destroying their life. What causes us to make poor decisions and fall short of our goals? We become distracted. You're listening to Dr. Matt Harris from Franklin, Tennessee, and our hope is to help you become more aware of the distractions of life so that you can live the life of your dreams. Life is often compared to running a race. And if we compare life to running a race, it's important to appreciate that there are different kinds of runners, two primary types of runners. One being a marathon runner and the other being a sprinter. Now, when you think about runners in these types of races, when you think about a marathon runner, what does a marathon runner look like when he or she finishes their race? They look exhausted, right? Oftentimes, your marathon runner, when they cross the finish line, they fall out and collapse. If it would be me running a marathon, I'd probably be vomiting, gasping for air, and needing an oxygen tank, right? So marathon runners, they don't look that great when they finish. Compare that to a sprinter. What does a sprinter look like when he or she finishes their race? They look totally different. Think about the Olympics. You know, you think about when you watch those great Olympians like Carl Lewis or Michael Johnson, or when they won their races, they would be sprinting around the track again, waving their flag, waving to all the fans in the stands, and yet they'll run several races within a day. So the difference between these two types of runners is the marathon runner is constantly grinding it out to the point of exhaustion, where the sprinter totally engages, totally disengages, totally engages, totally disengages. They both run races, but how they run those races is entirely different. And I think those principles, that model, is an example of how we can run our race of life. One of the big distractions is that we try to create balance to our life. I just 5 minutes ago had a conversation with a young lady her and her husband are about to have their first child. And they're going to try to figure out how to balance their life because they're adding a new dimension, right? So how do they balance, their work life? How do they balance their marriage? How do they balance being parents? How do I keep all these things going at the same time? And the reason why that's a distraction is it's something we try to achieve, but it really doesn't put most of us where we want to be, okay? Because what happens is when we're trying to create a balanced life, we're like that marathon runner. We're just grinding it out, and we're trying to manage everything all the time. We're touching everything constantly, and nothing ever gets our full attention. Where if we contrast that with the sprinter, and how do we fully engage in one dimension of our life as we disengage from another dimension. So now we're totally focused on whatever it is that's our priority at the time, instead of trying to manage everything all the time. Because when we try to manage everything all the time, that's where we go from giving out of all we got to all we got left. And as we've talked about before, that's when we're too tired, and that's a very dangerous place to be. That's where those unhealthy emotions like bitterness and frustration and anxiety and fear and all those things reside there. And so how do we engage this try to create a different kind of model, not only in our own thinking, but in a practical application? What does that mean? We've all heard about keeping the plate spinning. You think about, I guess it's in the circus or whatever. You see the guys spinning several plates at one time. That's what we try to do. We try to spin our personal life, our professional life, our family life, all these different things. And the challenge when we're trying to spin all those plates at one time is if one plate falls, oftentimes it causes several more, if not all of the rest, to crash with it. And so what if we change that model and we try to simply spin one plate at a time, and we give it our full focus? And then when we're finished spinning that plate, now we spin the next one and we give it our full focus. One of the challenges in business, and remember, we talk about a principle as a principle. It's a fundamental truth, and it transcends different dimensions in life. So these things we're going to talk about in terms of business and running a business, they transcend to our personal life as well, or our family life. And in trying to run a business, especially a small business, oftentimes the business owner must wear many different hats. And I'll just use myself as an example. In being a small business owner in the healthcare industry, my primary hat is a provider, is as a technician. I provide the technical services of our business. However, I'm also the business owner. So I have to be aware, I have to manage the operations of the business. I have to be aware of the marketing of the business. I have to be aware of the billing aspect of the business. I have to be aware of the maintenance of the business. There are all these different hats. I once described it to my banker that the challenge with the model that I created was that if I were the bank, not only would I be the president of the bank, but I was also the head teller. And so getting back into trying to create balance, I found myself in the trap of trying to manage all these things at one time. Well, we're taught growing up, oftentimes in our culture, that success is how big, how much, how many things can you get going, okay? Well, when you're trying to manage everything, then you can only do so much. You have a certain capacity of how you can manage all these activities. So you're taught that the key is delegate activities that other people can do to other people, right? So as your business grows, you start delegating. That's what we went through. We started delegating. And now, so you start to grow not only the amount you produce, but you also grow what it costs that business to be able to, what it costs that business to be able to function, meaning that your overhead grows with that business. And so the more your overhead grows, the more you have to produce. And so, for me personally, I reached a point at one time, because you always think, well, when I get here, once I get there, then that level, then I'll feel like I've made it. And when never gets here. You get to the next level and it's like, okay, well, now this, now that, and it's just a constant push. And the next thing you know, you've created something that you really trap yourself, okay? Because now you constantly have to produce at a higher level in order to manage everything, because one of the biggest challenges is you're trying to create balance to your life. You're trying to manage everything all at one time. And my dad, I remember my dad was watching how our business was growing, and he was a lot wiser than me, and I didn't have the experience yet to understand what it was he was trying to tell me. But he would see how things were growing for us, and he would say to me, he'd say, "Now, boy, remember, it's not how much you make, it's how much you keep." Because not only did he see our business growing, he saw our overhead growing. Well, I just constantly saw that overhead is pushing us to the next level. And so, but this is a challenge for a lot of small business owners. But it's not only a challenge for a lot of small business owners, it's a lot of challenge for moms, parents, people with aging parents. Their life grows, it expands in different directions. How do you manage all that? And so instead of always trying to delegate to other people, how about if we delegate to ourselves and we start to compartmentalize not only our schedule, but also compartmentalize our mind, our emotions. And so in creating something new and trying to learn from the lessons of before, instead of constantly delegating to other people, I started delegating to myself, but creating specific time for those activities. So now, instead of trying to handle marketing or growth of our business at the same time in between patients or whatever it may be, now I have certain times where that's what I address. And I don't focus on that any other time other than those allotted times. it's as simple as paying bills. I'm not trying to pay bills at lunch or do things like that. I have a certain time, Friday afternoons, after I finish patient hours, that's my bookkeeping time, right? Now, these are the compartments that we want to have, but also remember, health is adaptability. It doesn't matter if we're talking about our physical health, our financial health, our emotional health, whatever it may be. How healthy we are is how well we can directly adapt to the stresses or to what's being required of us. So my point is, as you create this act of total engagement, total disengagement to engage in something else, give yourself permission to have flexibility with it. So for instance, Friday afternoon, as I just mentioned, that's my bookkeeping administrative time. Well, I had an opportunity for a meeting with someone, a lunch meeting that I felt was important. So that was the best time to be able to host that meeting. So what did I do? I simply moved that block of admin time to another time. But I knew it was going to be taken care of. I didn't have to worry about it. I didn't have to try to figure out. I didn't have to let it hang over me all weekend. I knew at this allotted time, I had moved that block of admin time to be handled. Okay? So we want to give ourselves that adaptability as we start to create total engagement, total disengagement, right? So this way you can totally engage in your work. And you don't have to worry about what's going to be happening at home or what's happening later on, or because you know you have a time to manage it. So it takes that pressure off of you. You don't have to keep it going in your mind. And so then when you totally disengage from work, then you can come home and totally engage with your family. Have time where you totally engage with your significant other. Have time where you totally engage with yourself. We all need mental health time on a daily basis and on a weekly basis. So it's important that you schedule in your rest. Just as important as you have time where you sit down and pay your bills or do certain activities with your kids, it's important for each of us to delegate time for rest. Okay? And as we do this, instead of looking at how big, how complicated, how diluted can we create our lives, let's start to look for the elegance of simplicity. How simple can we make our lives? Because as we mentioned again, as we mentioned earlier, if we're constantly working to make our lives more diluted, and it becomes a trap. It can easily become a trap. And that trap is a distraction. It distracts us from what's really important for us because we're trying to maintain everything, okay? And now we can totally engage on the most important activities and people and relationships one at a time. And I think this is real important because when we think about life, one of the most one of the most valuable things that we leave when we leave this earth are our memories. And as we totally engage with those that we love and care about, now we can create those memories on purpose instead of just always trying to handle things on the fly and constantly being rushed. And because the things that we leave behind, most of it people just fight over. But those memories are things that we can treasure, that those we care about can treasure for the rest of their life. Okay? And so that total engagement, that total disengagement, to re-engage in something else, to create the elegance of simplicity, I think is a model that at least deserves conversation for us to start to assess it. What is it that we're really hoping to achieve and accomplish with our life? What do we want our life to be like at the end of the day? Now, realize just because it's simple doesn't mean it's easy. And it's going to take time. And so in having that appreciation that it's going to take time, let's start to look at this model from creating balance in our life to creating a rhythm. And one of the things that really helped me, and we'll put a link to this below, it was a message from a gentleman who he's just a special guy, I think. His name's Chris Brooks. But he did this series on Sabbath, or a day of rest. And what I learned from that is that I was never giving myself a day of rest. If you go to church on Sundays, especially if you have kids, Sunday is not a day off. It's a busy day. But I saw that as my day off, my day of rest. I would work on things on Saturdays, trying to get paperwork caught up and things of that nature. And so after listening to kind of how he laid out some principles of really of rest, how do you rest your mind? How do you rest your body? I learned that Sunday was not my last day of the week to be a day of rest. It was really my first day of the week. And now I use Sunday as a light work day. So I can totally disengage on Friday and Saturday to, number one, recover from being totally engaged during the week, and also to give myself a chance to disengage from work activities and really engage on activities with my family and my rest, so that I can disengage to re-engage for the next week. And so as we look at the dimensions of our life and what's important to us and how we want our life to flow, realize it's going to take you some time, weeks, months, even years, to really start to develop, how it is, what's that rhythm that you want your life to have. And guess what? As you get it figured out, life will happen, and there will be new dimensions or new obstacles that come up. But instead of letting it become a source of frustration and now another plate that you're trying to spin or another thing you're trying to balance, let's start to simplify it and say, okay, how can I engage this? How can I start to add this to the rhythm of my life instead of creating more frustration and fatigue and uncertainty, because I'm trying to create balance to my life. Because at the end of the day, how do we want to end our race? Do we want to end our race gasping for air and puking? Or do we want to end our race energized, excited, full of life, celebrating what we've just accomplished, or celebrating what our experience has been? I want to thank Justin Owens and Saints Alive Productions for their continued work on our podcast, on our social media, all that they do to help us and promote us and help us to share a message and create a conversation for each and every one of us. To how do we change how we look at things? When we change the way we look at things, the things we look at change. And sometimes we have to give ourselves permission to look at things from a different perspective and to realize, I'm doing things because I'm in the comfort of discomfort, or they're the way that I've always done them, even though they may not necessarily be serving me the way that I hope they would. So I just encourage each of us to remember that the number one thing that we train is our mind. So train your mind, control your emotions, say no to fear, and keep pressing on. Thanks for joining us.
Figure out what's working. That's where you put your hands. Don't let up for a moment, even when you're in the sand. The ground beneath your feet ain't solid, no, ain't strong, but the measure of a man is in his will to carry on. I am walking through the fire. I am moving with my head up high. I am learning what it means to keep pressing on. I'll keep pressing on. The grass is always greener on the other side, but the things that bring you there will prepare you for that time. Oh, and I can't help losing all